So I'm always going to look at it because there's new ways of thinking, there's new technologies, there's new information that comes, and we want to be able to adjust and iterate on that.
My name is Matt Reiner, managing partner at Capital Investment Advisor, CEO of Wellness Strategies, an author, podcast host, and also a speaker to the wealth management community. My mission is to help every family in this country have access and be served by a human financial advisor. That we all have to live in the moment and not try to force progress too quickly. Let it happen and commit to a long-term strategy in your life, in your business, and in your investment portfolio.
And now, your host and my dad, Matt Reiner.
Jerry Sneed of Procyon Partners. Welcome to the FutureProof Advisor podcast. How are you, my friend?
I'm well. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks for joining us, man. I'm really excited, and I think I mispronounced Procyon. I just asked you.
No, you said it good. Yeah, either way.
I said it right. So I always ask before, and then I always mess it up when it comes here. I'm really looking forward to this conversation, man. I think what we're going to be talking about with regards to learning, turning learnings into actions, and also I really want to dive into your personal why and talk about how why statements can be utilized and how to help families find that. I think that that's really important, right? Because as we talked about pre-recording, as we talked about on this podcast a lot, innovation and being proactive to change isn't about just doing innovation or exploring. You have to have the right mindset in order to create leverage that then ultimately creates the space and the opportunity for you to continue exploring and innovating going forward. And so that's what we're going to explore here. But before we do, I just want to get to know Jerry Sneed for a second. What did the 13-year-old Jerry Sneed want to be when he grew up?
Marine biologist, actually. I got licensed to be a scuba diver when I was 13. So that was the game until I found out that most marine biologists end up being biology teachers. So kind of killed it for me.
What age was that you found that out?
Probably freshman year of college, maybe a little bit younger. Right around there. I didn't fall in love with finance until school. I actually took a derivatives class, and I was actually a hotel management major going into school, and I took a derivatives class. I said, wow, this is really hard. And it was fascinating. So that's what made me pivot.
So tell me that story, right? From marine biologist, dreaming of being a marine biologist, pivots away because you don't want to be a biology teacher, to now in wealth management. Tell us that story.
Yeah. So, that's an interesting story. So yeah, marine biology, I was the first one in my family to go to college. So my parents said, I'd really like you to go, but I don't know how to help you. And so I said, great. Found a school that was relatively easy to go into, but they had a really good hotel management program. I really thought casinos were interesting. So, to kind of go run a casino. So went there, kind of signed up for that and started doing electives freshman year. Took one, I don't know how I got into derivatives course versus a basic finance course, but that's how I ended up. So learned what an options was, and that was it. And that kind of actually started my education on finance. I just started picking up books, you name them, Random Walk on Wall Street. A lot of them I have to relearn and reread because, I didn't know what I was reading back then, but I started reading books when I was 19 on finance, and I haven't stopped since. So. And
we're going to dive into that. I think that the exploration of, learning and using books, etc., I want to dive into. But before we do, you've joined us here on the FutureProof Advisor podcast. And so I always like to ask, what does it mean to be a future-proof advisor? What does it mean to you to be a future-proof advisor?
I think to be future-proof as an advisor requires you to be self-reflective. And I always laugh about this, but everybody's been trained by somebody in this industry, right? And we've all been in those meetings where you went out with the older guy and you get out of the meeting and the guy's like, oh, we killed it. It's great. And then the client never calls and you're telling your girlfriend at the time or, whoever, he was awful. He wasn't listening. He didn't answer any of the questions, and I just said that to myself. I never want to be that guy. So even to this day, I always say, like, even when I'm on, particularly when I'm on meetings with other people, it's like, what did I do wrong? What can I improve? Or I'll know, like, hey, I stumbled on this word, or I misspoke on this, just to always be honest with yourself, to make sure you just continuously have that edge. I think you can carry that across all parts of your business. So it's not just in meetings, but that's a big focus of mine, is just making sure I self-reflect to make sure I can continue to, I'm not fooling myself to thinking I'm something I'm not, and I can compound, my skill set.
Yeah, that reminds me of a pod we've done around curiosity, right? Is some of the most innovative and exploratory people that I know and that have impacted the world are constantly curious, and the root of being curious is self-awareness, and self-reflection plays into that. I think that one challenge that as I've talked to advisors and just others in general about self-reflection, is that sometimes self-reflection is hard because we don't ever want to look ourselves in the bad light, right? And we always say we want constructive criticism, but when we get the criticism, then and then something creeps into our mind called self-doubt starts creeping into our mind, right? Because then we're seeing, like, we're always looking at the bad things, and we're getting constructive criticism, and we're opening the door to that. How do you find that balance between, leveraging self-reflection but avoiding self-doubt through that process?
So there's a lot of fascinating material on inner monologue. I would say my inner monologue to myself is probably pretty harsh. But I don't think this is a negative, right? People say, like, positive self-talk, et cetera. Like, mine's probably pretty, like, let's go, kind of a deal. I just think that inner monologue is what jacks me up, and pushes me to, to reflect and be okay with, that, kind of negative feedback to myself. So I think it's all about how you process it, right? Like, just think you need to build that relationship with yourself and on that reflection, and it doesn't happen overnight. And it also evolves as you, mature and, mature in your career and personally. So.
Do you remember, like, a moment in your life, and this is a hard one, I know, but, like, a moment in your life where and you talked about it a little bit with, like, the meetings when you saw this person, you're like, that person thought we killed it and they didn't, and they thought they did everything right. But, like, even a moment prior to that led you to become a self-aware human, like that, because, like, being able to self-reflect creates a lot of self-awareness. Like, what about your history, your past, or your upbringing spurred you to become very highly self-aware?
So right out of undergrad, I became a financial advisor, at an insurance-backed RIA, and I did well because I got into utility companies, so utility workers, and I was handling, basically rollovers out of their 401ks and kind of building it up. But I would sit down with these guys, blue collar guys, worked for 35 years, and they're like, here's my 400 grand. It's all the money I have. I'm retiring. And, like, I mean, that scared the shit out of me. Right. And so, like, I was just super paranoid. I was 21 years old. I was just super paranoid that I didn't know enough. And so, like, that was like right then and there. It wasn't like oh, let's continue and maybe I do know enough. No, I didn't know enough. I immediately applied to get my MBA and, from portfolio management, immediately signed up for the CFA, sought out a job at Credit Suisse as a trader. Like, I literally was just like, I cannot take on this responsibility without making sure that I'm at least as smart as I think I can be. And, so that's right then and there is what kind of the epiphany, and that's just continue to compound.
So it's like this innate fear that you had, right? Of being good enough that, like, kind of drove you. It's like this innate fire of never feeling that you were good enough. Like, do you feel that you have that fire still? Like, I mean, you've now been in the industry for many years. You've gotten many designations. The CFA is one of the hardest designations to get. Do you still have that drive to be self-aware and self-reflective, or has it evolved over time as you've gotten more experience?
Yeah. I mean, I think you have to work at keeping the drive alive, but to me, the stakes just get higher and higher, right? I handle more money, bigger clients. I do a lot more, like, family planning and education to, like, the younger generations, which to me, like, the stakes are higher, right? Your clients are trusting you to literally teach their kids about money and, like, how to behave with it and how to invest it. And it's just a lot of responsibility. So I just think if you're serious about this role as an advisor, and this is your, passion in your career, I think you have to continuously learn.
And that then gets to kind of this question about how to learn and learning, right? I mean, things are changing constantly in the world, but I mean, they're also changing in some instance in wealth management constantly as well. And it feels like, at least to me, that the speed of change is happening faster and faster all the time. I'm curious, what does that speed of change mean to you? And And how does like the speed of change and how much change is happening impact your beliefs and your views as you go forward? I'm curious on that stance.
Yeah, I mean, the world's moving obviously a lot faster. So I think it's about how you structure your learning and your like days, your weeks, your years for that matter, to make sure you have time to slow down and like kind of digest. And so like it's challenging to read books when the news is flow is changing, the markets are moving around, and like you're trying to like gather thoughts and like kind of think bigger picture or like change philosophy. So I commit to vacations or even if it's a staycation at my house to make sure that I have time to read real books because it gets you away from the day-to-day noise of, all the information hitting you and allows you to just kind of think bigger picture or differently about stuff and kind of recalibrate it.
Yeah. Intentionality, it seems like, right? And so do you book that off in your mind, like, and you schedule, are you booking that off at the beginning of the year? Like, hey, I'm going to do a staycation, or is it kind of something that like bubbles up? You're like, I need some time, so I'm going to plan something out in the future. How does it go through with your schedule?
Usually it's just I schedule my whole year. Like usually in December, I reflect on the last year and then I schedule the entire next year, all my business trips. Normally they're the same. Clients kind of know what type of year I'm coming into town to see them. And then I set my vacations around that. That might move by a week or two, but at least it's there. I usually have like a list in my phone of all the books that I'm trying to read, and there's usually like 20 of them. And I'm not trying to get to all of them, but like I have that list of intentionality to make sure that I have at least an agenda. And like literally in this list is one of my questions I ask myself is, are you smarter than you were a year ago? And so you just continually remind yourself to kind of keep pushing that envelope.
When you think about how you learn, so it seems like you're a big reader, not necessarily maybe watching YouTube videos or podcasts. It sounds like reading is more of your forte. Is that fair to say?
Oh, no, I'm a big podcast guy. I think the most incredible thing that this generation has is access to podcasts. I mean, to me, you can literally get access to every professor you like, every CEO, like is absolutely incredible. I think there's a lot of noise. You got to kind of filter it and kind of take on a lot of data and then kind of focus it down to what kind of resonates with you and people who speak to you. But I think that's the biggest advantage that this generation has, or us in the next 20 years, just staying on top of our games. I mean, what a better way to just get access to so much knowledge.
And I couldn't agree more. I love that idea of, we now have access to the biggest and best minds and brightest minds in the world by listening to a podcast. I mean, what more valuable is that? I mean, it was impossible to have access to a CEO of a company. Now we have access to them at the palm of our hand. So I think that is such a major advantage. And then, I think about learning. Sometimes when learning happens, we tend to just like spread ourselves so thin and we go to all these different topics and we try to figure out a way to join them together. Are you someone that goes deep into a topic? Like you say, hey, I want to go learn about artificial intelligence, or I want to go learn about behavioral finance, and you'll read like every book about it? Or do you find yourself reading multiple books about multiple things and trying to pair them together, or just gain as much knowledge as you can that way?
Usually it's like one topic at a time that I'll kind of stumble into and kind of think is fascinating, right? So like right now with the tariffs going on, I've been reading Andrew Mellon's biography. He was a Secretary of the Treasury back in like the 20s across 3 administrations. It's the only resource I could find of someone who implemented tariffs as aggressively as they're trying to do now, and just kind of how it trickles through, the world. So like I'd say like that's like a focal point. I did the same thing when it came to, thinking about NVIDIA and the metaverse and all that kind of stuff, 6-7 years ago. So I usually focus on a topic that I kind of stumble across that's interesting to me.
And you just continue to build out on that. So you talked about tariffs as something that you're thinking about or reading about or learning about right now. And I love that approach to it. It's not reading about the headlines or the news stories. You went and found someone that implemented something in a similar way, although in a different time, that you then now can relate and bring that together. That to me is advanced knowledge-based wisdom, right? That is wisdom. And so I'm curious, to help some of us that may not have been able to read that book yet, what are you learning on that?
I'm learning that tariffs are a very, very good tool over the short term. Over the long term, they're extremely challenging. And so and the reason I did this, by the way, is because with Trump being such a polarized character, you can't even talk to clients if they hate him or they like him, they're so biased to it. So you have to draw parallels to something else. And that's what I was trying to seek is like, where can I get some knowledge that no one's going to get upset one way or the other based on what the outcome is.
What have you found to be a successful way to turn your insights and your information gathering into actions, whether it's personally or within your professional world as well?
So I think the key is you can't look for an immediate result, right? You're compounding knowledge inside your brain, and you're just not sure where that's going to come out and add value to your life or add value to your client's life. You just don't know. So I don't think you can go into it with like, hey, I'm going to get this outcome or this is going to help me do this. You learn it and you store it away. And you'll be surprised at the cocktail party you're at after a week of travel where you're talking to a client and all of a sudden that tidbit of information comes out and helps you, maybe close a client or move something along that you didn't expect. So I don't think you should, it's knowledge you're building for the future. You don't know when you're going to use it.
I find in the world today that people just want to find the answer and they just take that surface level answer as being the right answer. And they don't necessarily have the depth to understand why it's that answer and why they believe it's that answer. And sometimes it's a matter of asking the right questions, and you have to challenge your own assumptions, which is really difficult for a lot of people to do. I mean, I'm not great at it. It's hard for me. I have to be really intentional about it. But how have you found that how have you found it to work for you and going deeper?
So I think you always just have to challenge your own opinion. So like right now, I think the markets are kind of becoming a coiled spring in the sense that I think there's going to be deregulation, lower taxes. I think tariffs won't be that bad. And I think AI is a real durable theme. So I'm like saying the next 18 months, I think we're going to 7,000 on the S&P. All right. So I come up with that idea. I'm thinking to myself and I'm like, all right, how are you wrong? Right? Like this person saying this person saying this, like how could you possibly be wrong? And you carry that along to everything that you do. If it's the next technology you want to use for your firm, like how could what wrong? And I just think that extra level of insight is what makes you like kind of stick and have conviction in those opinions in whatever you're doing.
Yeah, it's the alternative of how a lot of us humans work, right? You're going from the angle saying, how can I be wrong? Whereas a lot of people, and we leverage technology today to go and say, I need more data to show that I'm right. And that is super important. And it's super important differentiation of curiosity and wisdom versus just outcome-based information and how to leverage it. So I think that that's really interesting. If we move on here, curiosity is there. We mentioned and we talked a little bit about our own personal whys. People ask, well, Matt, why are you doing what you do? And my answer very simply is I think that every human being needs and deserves and should have a human financial advisor. And so I think that it's better to make everybody better so we can serve more people. That's why I do what I do. That's why I do all this thought leadership stuff. What is your why? What is your personal why?
So I'm gonna tell you this guy's name. There's this guy named Joe Gagnon. He's a CEO of a healthcare company, and essentially the guy, I think he ran 7 marathons in 7 days on 7 continents. Okay, that's like just to give you a level of this guy's what he's doing. But I went to a conference a couple of years ago, and he was speaking, and he had this concept of who are you and what do you want to be? That's your first question. Second question is what is your purpose? And then what will be your legacy? So I think everybody should answer those 3 questions. Okay. And so when you think about like, what will be your legacy? Like I write down successful daughters. I have 2 young daughters. I want them to be successful. They're 3 and 5 right now. So that's like what I hope to be my legacy amongst like maybe a couple other things, philanthropic or whatever the case may be. But who am I? I'm like kind of a markets financial advisor, trader, family office guy. Who do I want to be? I want to be the best financial advisor in the country, right? I integrate into families for all things finance, and that's what I want to be. To me, that is such a like moving target that like you can't ever get there, right? But like to me, that's a great way to stay motivated and get up and get to your desk every day. Is to there's a lot of good advisors in this country, and that's the bar you're setting where you're all racing each other. I mean, it sounds like a lot of fun.
That is the power and what is the the strength of a really good why, that it's not a finish line, that it's a constant evolution and progression towards. And it's kind of like the Vince Lombardi quote, right? It's not about perfection, it's about the pursuit of perfection that creates greatness, right? That nature. That's what a why does. And you know, like you have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. I can relate to that. I have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old as well, right? So you want to make them good human beings. You want to make them great. That is a never-ending game, even when they leave your house, right? That is the emphasis of a why. And we were just talking about how important it is to us individually. You know, I think about in wealth management how planning and investments today are like table stakes. Like it's not easy to sell against another firm saying I do planning and they don't. Like planning is planning, and investments is like can't really sell against that because it's been commoditized to an extent. So we have to get to the next way to differentiate ourselves. And I'm curious. One is, how are y'all helping to differentiate yourselves when you have table stakes now of planning, and even service offerings are becoming table stakes as well? What are y'all doing to differentiate yourselves in the business?
To narrow it down to like what I think is going to be the most impactful is the education side of our business. Is educate. Like we have really good relationships with a lot of high net worth individuals. It's taking it and educating their kids, because I want my girls to be successful. If someone is offering to teach them something that's going to let their knowledge compound and make them successful, that's what I'm interested in. And so I kind of took that idea, and I do a lot of educational seminars and planning with all of my clients' kids to make sure that they're, it could be as simple as me sending them a book, sending them a podcast, whatever the case may be, to make sure that their knowledge is compounding and they at least know where to go when they want to learn something. I always say there's no dumb questions. There's no bad questions. We're here for a resource. I think that is a way to differentiate, because every single family has a different need or a different way to learn. And so that's something that cannot be commoditized.
And I think that is unique, right? That's different of going beyond the client and going to the next generation. There's multiple facets of benefit to that. And then I wonder, something that we're exploring and I've been talking a good deal about as well is, we just talked about whys and how they're powerful to us. There's also this ability to educate families on how to figure out their own whys. Have you been able to explore any of that? Do you have those types of conversations with your families of saying, like who you are, who you want to be, and the legacy you want to live, and help them do that? Because I think that people always say, yeah, I have a purpose, but they don't really have a deep understanding of the reason behind that purpose. Do you go deeper, and have you ever been able to have those conversations with families in that level?
It's the same thing that I just brought up with you, who you are, who you want to be, and who your legacy. I probably don't lay it out that like blatant, because some of my clients are, rough and tough, manufacturing guys that tell me to get the hell out of their office. But I try and get those questions answered to make sure that they are telling them, and particularly those guys, because those are the guys that are probably not the easiest in telling, their kids or whoever else what's important to them and how they feel, et cetera. And it's like, when you're gone, you've created this legacy, this a lot of money, and you worked hard. Like, how are your kids going to remember that? Remember you, remember this, your true wishes. Like, to me, that's a lot of heavy, impactful stuff that you have to kind of pull out of a lot of people, particularly from previous generations. I think the next generation might be a little bit easier at those soft skills. But I think, just the rough and toughness of the past generation of at least entrepreneurs, I think it's a big value add to get that out of them.
Two things that you said there that I thought were super interesting. One is that there is no real like pathway to do this. It's not like, hey, do this first and then do this. Every individual person is going to be different, and it's a matter of getting to that end state. I remember hearing Joe Duran talk about that on a Michael Kitcey's podcast back in 17 or 18 about how the process is in United Capital. It's like, this is the end state we want. How we get there is different for every person, but everybody gets there. And that's what you're saying. But you also bring up another point that I'm interested to explore, in the sense that, these people, you said, I work with construction or engineers, and they're rough and tough, and like they don't like to talk about feelings. And I think that that's a real thing. Like, people don't like to talk about feelings. But we just said that for us, it's important to go deep into understanding who you are, why you are, and what your legacy is, because that gives us this consistent finish line of purpose, of meaning, and of direction. And so there is value there. And I know that if that is the end state, how do we get better as an industry in your mind, or in your belief, to help people get more comfortable having those types of conversations, as opposed to just looking at us as financial advisors as the people that talk about money. So it's not just direct, like, make me money. Like, what are you doing to make me money? Give me a tax strategy, all that type of stuff. Like, how do we make families in the whole kind of opportunity of people, the world, view us as more people, that more depth, as opposed to just financial advice?
So I think as an advisor, you have to commit to it because you don't get paid for it in a sense, right? So like you have to believe that this is going to improve your business over the long term, ingrain your relationships, et cetera, which you kind of think it's obvious that it does, but there's no immediate, compensation for this, right? This is just the way you're going to, kind of build rapport with the family. You have to truly believe that this is the best benefit of the family, because when you go and start talking about it, it's got to come out that way, right? The passion's got to come out for this topic. So I think it starts with you as an advisor committing to this and committing to this process. And then on the flip side, to get them to kind of break the laws down, my trick is, if they have daughters, which I know because I'm a softie, is go ask their daughters what they think is important to their father about their legacy, and then go bring it back to them. And then they'll just, they'll open right up. Might take a couple whiskeys, but then they open right up.
Alcohol always helps in the situation, and kids especially. I mean, fathers with daughters, and when you think about this, this just came up as well, because we're talking about the fathers in the relationship, because that's who we tend to talk with when it comes to financial advice. How successful have you been to be able to get both spouses involved? Are you finding success getting both spouses involved in the conversation?
For the most part, yes. For the most part, yes. A lot of times it's, you ask the tough question to the husband, he kind of gives you a short answer, but the wife kind of gets to, knows where you're going. Women obviously have way better, soft skills than men. So they kind of get the angle you're going at, and they kind of push on it as well. And they know their husband's better. So then they even help you get that information out of them. Right. And then they'll pivot to themselves too, which is, to me, it can be a beautiful thing when you get everybody really open to the idea, and then you start putting this into a framework where they can actually like kind of live off of and compound. And this doesn't have to be for the ultra wealthy, right? Like, money's all subjective based on what you're going to give. If you are, a utility worker and you're giving your kid $100,000, it's $100,000 more than they probably had when they started, right? So it's all material based on the subject.
I love it. I want to switch gears for 1 second. There's something, this is like a pet project of mine, and it's something I've been exploring and curious about. That's one of the reasons why I do this podcast, is just the quench my curiosity. And it's around segmentation. I've been asking all my guests about segmentation. I'm just super interested about it. And I think that I remember you saying that you all segment based off of fee. What's your view of the benefit or the rationale around segmentation?
So I don't have a rationale around it. The question was, that's how the firm does it, right? Like, I think every firm has to have a process around it in a sense. So when I sought out higher education, I went to work at Credit Suisse. I was a trader and strategist, started off as a client associate and worked my way up as trader and strategist, but it was a $5 billion private wealth team, some of the wealthiest people in the country. So like I was 22. I'm numb to money. Like, it doesn't matter if it's $100 million or $100,000. Like, it does not make a difference to me. It's all percentages. So I would say that's my biggest challenge or flaw, I would say, is that like I don't have the ability to segregate a $500,000 client and a $5 million client and figure out the different services I should offer them, because to me it's all percentages, and I can do the same thing for each person. Which you would argue from like if you were a consultant to my practice, you'd be like, well, you shouldn't be dealing with anybody less than $1 million or $2 million, et cetera. Okay, fine. One day I'll get there. But to me, I don't segregate it.
But when you say percentages, are you saying like percentages of time? Like, if I have a $5 billion client and a $500 million client, then it's just two clients, so it's 50-50? Or is it like, hey, now I have 5.5 billion that I'm managing, so 95% of the time goes to the 5 billion and 5% of my time goes to the 5.
I meant the dollar amount doesn't even matter. I'm doing an asset allocation based on this much the large cap, this much the mid value cap. It doesn't make a difference if it's, if I'm putting 200 grand into one of them or 200 million, it doesn't make a difference. So it's really less. My time is the same. To me, the same amount of time for a $500,000 client, same amount of time as a $50 million client. So, which is, I understand it's not smart.
Well, no, I think that's the evolution. I'm trying, because the reason I'm so curious about segmentation, I think that hearing everybody's thoughts is really interesting, is I think that segmentation is antiquated. And we're just, because there is this view, and it's similar to kind of yours, it's like it doesn't matter. Segmentation doesn't really matter. And then there's this other side of view, it's like segmentation allows me to figure out what services to provide, which I think is like a service segmentation, or like a service offering segmentation strategy, which I think makes sense. But like where I get to segmentation is like the root of why we started to segment was so that we could serve families more effectively than we would if we didn't have segmentation. And I'm trying to figure out, how do we, now that the world has evolved beyond wealth, right? Wealth isn't a differentiator now. What's a differentiator is psychographic. Like me and you could have 5 million, I could have 100,000, but we both think very similarly. And if we're in a traditional segmentation strategy, you're going to get one sort of treatment, I'm going to get another, and it's not going to be, it's tailored towards my wealth, but not our personalities. And I'm trying to figure out, how do we, because shouldn't segmentation be a tool for how we can serve more people more effectively in the way that resonates more reasonably with them, as opposed to serving them in a way that based on how much money they have or their income they generate us?
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant idea. I've never thought about it. I've always ignored the segmentation, so I've never spent time to try and figure out like how to fix it. I will tell you, kind of a competitive advantage that I've kind of always used is that I learned how firms do segment the clients. And so I just treat a client that's $500,000. I treat them like they're worth $1 million. The client's worth $5 million. I know how to treat them like they're worth 10 worth 20 like 50. And then all of a sudden they're getting service and coverage like they've never had before. And so it's a massive competitive advantage because now they're never leaving, because like they've never experienced this before. So like I've kind of flipped it and used it as an advantage, knowing how segmentation is, also knowing that I don't really segment, everybody gets the same level of service, as far as I'm concerned, but I don't know. And I like your point, because your point, if you can figure out another way to segment them, it's not about money. It's about just what makes them happier as clients.
Right. And if we can do that at scale, right? Now, granted, time and everything of that nature, but as we move into this world and this era of AI, the ability to provide the appropriate touch point with the appropriate content, with the appropriate sentiment at the appropriate time to a set of people is more possible than ever. Now, the medium of how it's done may be different, right? Maybe it's like a pre-recorded video for one size of clients, another, but but they're at least getting something. Maybe they don't want to talk about the markets, they're talking about something else, but another set of clients want about the markets. Like, you now have this ability, and maybe you call like your $5 billion client because that's what they want, but it's still communicating the same message, drastically independent of wealth. I think that there's such opportunity there, and it's just a curious aspect there. All right, I'm going to wrap up here. I want to ask my 2 final questions for you. I mean, we could talk for days. I think you're in line with me of just being consistently curious, and I love that and appreciate that. Before I let you go, I'm always just curious, and we talked about tariffs, but let's now maybe move that one off, because we know that's a question that everybody's asking. Outside of tariffs, what is the most common question on your clients' minds these days?
Should I buy Tesla? True.
What's the answer?
True. I mean, depends on if you like Elon or not. I'd say I think everybody's generally nervous. I actually think that no one's looking at their portfolios, right? And so that's another one to talk about education, is that I'm the guy that forces every client to look. Like, don't waste a good crisis. I force them to look. Like, Nvidia's down 20% year to date, right? You didn't look, last year when it was up 180. You're looking now because this is what happens, right? So when you want to load up on Nvidia, you got to understand that this is kind of stuff that can happen when you have, dislocations in the market. This is a perfect teaching opportunity for the client's kids, to show them, hey, how does this feel, right? If you had 100 grand in this and went down $20,000, how would it feel? And so I think most clients are quiet because they don't want to look, and I just been spending a lot of time forcing them to do so.
I think that's amazing. It's a teaching opportunity, right? Too many advisors teach on the upside, and then they try to debate and rationalize on the downside. If we can flip it we can teach on the downside and teach on the upside, because you can teach on the upside. Remember that time down here. I think that's really powerful, my friend. All right, last question. I mean, you like to read. I know you're reading some books on tariffs, but what's one book out there that you think everybody should read? One of maybe your favorite, best, most influential books?
Relentless by Tim Grover. Tim Grover is the guy who trained Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, Dwayne Wade. He's got a book out called Relentless. I listen to it on my audiobook. I listen to it every year. It's the first book I listen to. I do it while I run. It's super motivational. It's a little intense, but I think everybody's got to read it.
I love it. I'm gonna have to go order it. That sounds fantastic. It's a great one for a vacation that's coming up, so I'll get that one on the docket. Jerry Sneed, man, I am super appreciative of you taking time to join us here on the pod to talk about yourself and your firm, your families that you serve. You're definitely making the industry better. I appreciate that. Thanks so much. Stay well, be well, keep exploring, my friend.